The city of Stalingrad was not supposed to be important. It was just another city in the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, a place where people lived and worked far from the front lines of the war. It was a city named for the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. This alone gave it a symbolic significance that could not be ignored. It was a point of pride for the Soviets. The name itself was a rallying cry, a symbol of Soviet strength and resilience, but the city was also a vital hub for industry and transport. Its factories produced essential goods, and its railways and roads were crucial for moving supplies. It sat on the banks of the Volga River, a major artery for transportation and logistics. This made it a strategic prize for the Germans. They saw an opportunity to disrupt Soviet supply lines and gain a foothold in the region. They wanted to cut off Soviet supply lines and seize the oil fields of the Caucasus. Control of Stalingrad would pave the way for further advances. The city's fate would become a symbol of the entire war. Its defense and eventual liberation would be seen as a turning point. The Volga River was a lifeline for the Soviet Union. It was essential for moving troops, equipment, and supplies. Supplies flowed north through the city, ensuring that the front lines were well stocked. Oil, vital for the war effort, was transported from the south. Stalingrad was a choke point, a critical juncture that could not be lost. If the Germans took the city, they could strangle the Soviet war machine. The consequences would be dire. The city's factories also churned out weapons and ammunition. These were essential for the Soviet war effort. Losing Stalingrad would be a blow to Soviet morale and production. It would be a psychological and material defeat. The people of Stalingrad knew the city was important. They understood what was at stake. They were determined to defend their homes and their country. Every citizen was ready to contribute to the war effort. Workers toiled day and night in the factories. Their labor was crucial for the war effort. Women and children helped build defenses. Everyone had a role to play in the city's defense. The city was bracing itself for a fight. The people of Stalingrad were ready to stand their ground, no matter the cost. The summer of 1942 brought the German Sixth Army to the outskirts of Stalingrad. Led by General Friedrich Paulus, the Germans were confident. They had swept across Europe, crushing all resistance. Their blitzkrieg tactics, using tanks and aircraft in rapid strikes, had been devastatingly effective. The Soviets had already suffered heavy losses. The Germans believed Stalingrad would fall quickly. The initial German attacks were fierce. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, pounded the city from above. Bombs rained down on buildings, factories, and civilians. The city was soon engulfed in flames and smoke. The German army advanced relentlessly, pushing back the Soviet defenders. The blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. But the Soviets were not giving up. They fought back with a ferocity that surprised the Germans. Every street, every building became a battleground. The Soviets were determined to make the Germans pay for every inch of ground. Hitler, the German leader, had become obsessed with Stalingrad. He saw the city's capture as a personal triumph. He believed that taking the city that bore Stalin's name would break the Soviet will to fight. But this obsession blinded him to the realities on the ground. He made several crucial mistakes. Hitler's biggest mistake was underestimating his enemy. He believed the Soviets were beaten, their army on the verge of collapse. He did not anticipate their resilience, their willingness to fight to the death. This misjudgment would prove fatal. Hitler also interfered with his generals, overruling their advice. He demanded the capture of the city at all costs, even when it became clear that a costly street-by-street battle would be necessary. His obsession with Stalingrad diverted resources from other fronts, weakening the German army elsewhere. The Soviet defense of Stalingrad was led by General Georgy Zhukov, a brilliant strategist known for his tenacity. Zhukov knew that the city itself could become a trap for the Germans. He ordered his troops to fight for every block, every building. The longer the Germans were bogged down in street fighting, the more vulnerable they became. Zhukov implemented a scorched earth policy. Soviet troops destroyed anything that could be of use to the advancing Germans. Factories, bridges, even entire neighborhoods were razed to the ground. The Germans would find nothing but rubble and ruin. The harsh Russian winter set in, adding to the German woes. Temperatures plummeted and snowstorms blanketed the battlefield. The Germans, ill-prepared for the extreme cold, suffered from frostbite and hypothermia. Their equipment froze. and their supply lines stretched thin. Section 5. A city of rubble. Stalingrad became a nightmare landscape of rubble and destruction. Buildings were reduced to skeletons. Streets were littered with debris and corpses. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the stench of death. It was a battle unlike any other, fought at close quarters with unimaginable brutality. Snipers, particularly Soviet snipers, played a crucial role in the urban warfare. They turned the ruins into their hunting grounds, picking off German soldiers from hidden positions. One of the most famous Soviet snipers, Vasily Zaitsev, was credited with over 200 kills in Stalingrad alone. The fighting was often hand-to-hand. Soldiers fought with rifles, bayonets, and even their bare hands in the darkness of cellars and sewers. Every inch of ground was contested with a ferocity that defied imagination. Section 6. The tide turns. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in favor of the Soviets. The relentless Soviet forces, driven by a fierce determination to defend their homeland, started to gain the upper hand. They had a seemingly endless supply of fresh troops and equipment. Reinforcements and supplies continued to pour in, bolstering their strength and morale. The Germans, on the other hand, were exhausted and depleted. Their initial momentum had waned, and the harsh conditions were taking a severe toll on their forces. Their supply lines were overstretched, and their equipment was failing in the bitter cold. The unforgiving Russian winter compounded their struggles, making resupply efforts nearly impossible. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. This meticulously planned operation aimed to encircle and crush the German forces. It was a massive counter-offensive that caught the Germans completely by surprise. The sheer scale and intensity of the attack overwhelmed the German defenses. Soviet armies under the command of General Zhukov smashed through the weak flanks of the German Sixth Army. Zhukov's strategic brilliance and the determination of his troops proved decisive. They encircled the Germans, trapping them inside the city they had nearly conquered. The once formidable German army found itself in a dire predicament. The German situation was desperate. Cut off from reinforcements and supplies, their chances of survival dwindled with each passing day. They were surrounded, low on supplies, and exposed to the full fury of the Russian winter. The freezing temperatures and relentless Soviet attacks left them with little hope. Hitler, however, refused to allow a retreat. His stubbornness and refusal to acknowledge the dire situation only worsened the plight of his soldiers. He ordered the Sixth Army to fight to the death. This order, driven by a misguided sense of pride and determination, sealed their fate. It was a suicidal order that would doom hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. The once mighty German Sixth Army was now facing annihilation with no hope of escape or victory. Section 7. Trapped. The German Sixth Army was now trapped in a shrinking pocket of resistance within Stalingrad. The Soviets tightened their grip, bombarding the Germans with artillery and launching relentless infantry attacks. The German soldiers, starving and freezing, fought with the desperation of cornered animals. Supplies could no longer reach the trapped Germans. The Luftwaffe attempted to airdrop supplies, but it was not nearly enough. The starving soldiers resorted to eating horses, rats, and even their own boots. Disease was rampant. The once mighty Sixth Army was on the verge of collapse. Field Marshal Paulus, the German commander, pleaded with Hitler for permission to surrender. He knew further resistance was futile, but Hitler refused, convinced that a miracle would save his army. The Führer's stubbornness condemned his own men to a pointless death. Section 8. Surrender. On February 2, 1943, after months of brutal fighting, the last remnants of the German Sixth Army surrendered to the Soviets. Over 91,000 German soldiers, including 22 generals, laid down their arms. It was a crushing defeat for Hitler and a turning point in the war. The few German soldiers who survived the battle faced a grim fate. They were marched off to Soviet prisoner of war camps, where many perished from disease, starvation, and mistreatment. Only a fraction of those captured at Stalingrad would ever see Germany again. The victory at Stalingrad was a huge morale booster for the Soviets and their allies. It proved that the German army was not invincible. The myth of German invincibility was shattered on the frozen banks of the Volga River. Section 9. A turning point. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in World War II, a pivotal moment that changed the course of history. It marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, signaling a shift in the momentum of the war. The German army suffered a catastrophic defeat, losing hundreds of thousands of men and vast amounts of equipment, which crippled their ability to wage war effectively. The defeat at Stalingrad sapped German morale and resources, shifting the balance of power in favor of the Allies and giving them a much-needed boost. The battle also had a profound impact on the Soviet Union, bolstering their resolve and determination to push forward. The victory at Stalingrad came at a terrible cost, with the city left in ruins and countless lives lost. Millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians had perished in the fighting, their sacrifices etched into the annals of history. But the victory instilled a sense of national pride and determination in the Soviet people, a fierce resolve to continue the fight. They had defeated Hitler's armies, and they would continue to fight until final victory, no matter the cost. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the bloodiest and most brutal battles in human history, a stark reminder of the horrors of war. It stands as a testament to the human cost of war and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable suffering, a legacy that endures to this day.